Etymology. It's the study of a word's history, where you go retrace the steps of a language to figure out its origin. Essentially like studying the word's evolution. Unfortunately, it tends to be very boring. There's a reason only one entomologist is allowed in the realm of entertainment, and even then that's just to numb us into a sleepy trance to fund more episodes of Countdown. I mean, seriously, even if you like the show, just watch one of the other 7,000 plus episodes. The other reason entomology doesn't spark a whole lot of interest in most people is it's not particularly necessary to know. I mean, every day thousands of people use the word melon without even knowing its evolution from ancient Greek titty euphemisms. But every now and again, ever so rarely, you come across a word that's etymology is too interesting to ignore. A good example of this is defenestration, a word that few people will ever use. It's a noun that describes the act of throwing something out of the window. Surely not a particularly useful word to know, even in the archaic times before yeet was invented. And surely it's not necessary to have a word dedicated to this action alone. Well, aside from the players of Dark Souls, there is a group of people to which this word is necessary. The inhabitants of Bohemia between the 14th and 17th centuries. Though in their case, the things being thrown through windows weren't controllers after their 8th death on the way to the Abyss Watchers. I mean, come on guy, you're not even the real boss here, just let me through. But instead, what was being thrown was politicians, slightly heavier, but at least cheaper to replace. The story of the word defenestration starts on the 30th of July 1419, but let's quickly dial back the clock another decade or so in order to introduce a man named Jan Hus. Jan Hus was a religious philosopher at the University of Prague, and was critical of many teachings of the Catholic Church. In fact, Jan Hus was a reformist, and a good 70 years before Martin Luther made it so trendy. Jan's writings became popular and controversial in the early 1400s, and he gathered a group of followers known as the Hussites. Unfortunately for Jan, being a controversial religious scholar in 15th century Europe was a risky job to have, up there with kamikaze flight instructor or Australian Prime Minister. So the Council of Constance brought him in to stand trial, accused of heresy. Jan Hus said he was innocent, and the councillors said,
"Sure, Jan."
And on the 6th of July 1415 he was to be burned alive at the stake. However, in a stroke of luck, his conviction was overturned and he was exonerated. But that decision was made by Pope John Paul II. Oops, a bit late. Sorry, Jan. What tends to happen when one religious group executes the leader of another? The rising of tensions. You'd think that this would be something the Catholic Church would know better than most, but apparently not. Which brings us to July 1419, and to another Jan, this time a Jan Zalewski, a Hussite preacher from the Kostel Pani Marie Szczesny. He organized a protest against the Prague New Town Council for refusing to release some Hussite prisoners. Leading his congregation outside the town hall, it wasn't long until a mob of protesters drew in a crowd of onlookers consisting mainly of anti-Hussite Catholics. It was from this crowd that the spark of violence would come, when one onlooker began to throw stones at the protesters. Enraged, the Hussites stormed the town hall, grabbing hold of the 7 council members inside and tossing them through the nearby 3rd-story window. Imagine, for a second, that you're a Bohemian council member who's just been thrown through a window by a mob of angry proto-Protestants. You'd probably think that things couldn't get much worse. Until you look down and notice that below you is a crowd of spear-wielding Hussites, keen on the game of medieval lacrosse in which you've just become the ball. This gruesome incident ended with 7 council members being Swiss cheesed from 15 meters up. And the retaliation against the Hussites was harsh. In fact, this first defenestration of Prague is regarded by most as the inciting incident of the Hussite Wars, which raged for the following 17 years and were fairly complex. The second defenestration of Prague is like the middle child of the 3 events, that is to say poorly documented and frequently forgotten about. It took place on the 24th of September 1483, and was instigated by members of the Communion under Both Kinds sect of Catholicism. They were fearing a shrinking of their influence, so in protest tossed the burgomaster of Prague's old town, as well as the bodies of 7 council members from the new town off their respective town halls. Reports of this are sketchy and vary greatly, but it seems that one of the major differences from the first defenestration 64 years earlier was that the council members had already been killed before being thrown off the town hall. Lucky them. The aftermath of this event was a series of treaties between the old, new, and lesser towns of Prague, which required the serving of both kinds during communion. Just to be clear, the first defenestration was over the execution of a religious scholar and resulted in almost 2 decades of war, while the second was over what was served at Sunday Mass and resulted in a menu change. It's kind of obvious why some historians choose to ignore this defenestration. The third defenestration of Prague happened almost 200 years later than the first, in 1618. However, it shared plenty of the same themes, those being Protestant-Catholic tensions, the tossing of disliked council members through high windows, and inciting the start of a decades-long war. This time we start not with a religious scholar being burnt alive, or what should be served during Mass, but with peasants arguing over land rights. Riveting! To boil down the background as much as possible, some Protestants wanted to build chapels on some land. The Catholic Church didn't want them to, so began an argument of whether or not the king outranked the Catholic emperor or not. So on the 23rd of May 1618, a meeting of the Czech Protestant estates was called, led by Jindřich Matyáš Thun and Václav Budovec, to plan for the removal of 2 particular councilmen. These council members were Vilém Slavata and Jaroslav Borcheta, both members known for their support of the Habsburg repressions against Protestant nobility. Jindřich and Václav amassed a crowd of angry Protestants at Prague Castle. From there they marched to the Bohemian Chancery, where they grabbed the 2 imperial governors. However, the crowd acted much less hastily compared to the mob in the first defenestration, and upon seizing the council members, held a trial where they accused Vilém and Jaroslav of violating the rights of religious freedoms. At 3 p.m, the 2 council members were found guilty, and in a totally fair, unbiased court of their peers, were sentenced to be thrown through the 16-meter-high windows of their chancery. The sentence was to be carried out immediately, no appeal or anything. It might be harsh, but at least it was effective. Just a quick side note before we get to the window throwing and its aftermath, I want to quickly mention a man named Philip Fabricius. He was a scribe at the Chancery, and the poor guy got handed the same sentence as the 2 councillors. The reason for this was because the mob wanted to punish a scribe named Pavel Michna, but because Pavel wasn't present at the Chancery when the crowd arrived, they decided that any scribe would do and punished Philip instead. Carrying on, the 3 victims of the third defenestration were lucky, compared to the previous ones at least, because instead of landing on a mob of spear-wielding Hussites, they landed on a pile of horse manure waiting to be spread around the Chancery's gardens. Of those thrown, only Vilém was injured, and all 3 promptly fled the scene. This is where Philip becomes relevant, because he immediately fled to Vienna to inform the emperor what had happened. For this, and for surviving his 70-foot fall, Philip Fabricius was ennobled, so if anything, the experience was a net positive for him. In the aftermath of this defenestration, both sides went to work to spin it to their cause. I don't think I can express how funny it was better than this source does, so I'll just read it verbatim. Roman Catholic imperial officials claimed that the governors survived thanks to the mercy of the benevolent Chemizian angels, assisting the righteousness of the Catholic cause, while Protestant pamphleteers asserted that their survival had more to do with the horse excrement in which they landed than any benevolent acts by the angels of the Christo-Chemizian order. Apart from causing another argument, this one over the merits of angels versus horse poop, the third defenestration of Prague is also cited as one of the major events leading to the 30 Years' War, alongside the appointment of Emperor Ferdinand II, the Bohemian Revolt, and the victories of the Catholic League. This war actually did last for 30 years, by the way, from 1618 to 1648, so take notes, 100 Years' War. But it's another conflict far, far too complex to put in this video. So that about covers the origin of the word defenestration. I passed over plenty in the short video, so please check out the sources posted in the description for more information. While the 3, or 2 depending on who you ask, events themselves are no more than a fun footnote in a very long, complex history of Catholic-Protestant conflict in Bohemia, I thought they deserved a brief explanation. I also apologize for the pronunciation in this video. My fat tongue can barely get English right most days, so the names of Czech historical figures are a bit beyond my reach. One last thing. If you're ever visiting the Chancery of Prague, look for 3 sandstone pillars in the gardens. They mark the spot where a pile of horse dung saved the lives of Vilém Slavata, Jaroslav Borcheta, and the scribe Philip Fabricius.